Starting off with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and I think they had a really solid deadline. They needed to address the bullpen. They ranked 27th in Fangraph wins above replacement in relief pitching, so they added A.J. Puck. He's been amazing out of the bullpen since going back there from the rotation and has a couple of years of control to go along with it. Dylan Floro, he's a rental. He's been great for the Rangers this year, and they also added Josh Bell in a pretty low-key move. Christian Walker is injured right now, and Josh Bell is hot, so I think that was solid. Overall, I'll give the Diamondbacks a B+. On to the Atlanta Braves, and they brought back an old friend in Jorge Soler, and they really needed to add a bat. They lost Ronald Acuna Jr. at the beginning of the year. They lost Ozzie Albies recently, so Jorge Soler will definitely give them a lift, and he's been red hot as of late. They also brought back Luke Jackson, who pitched well for them back in 2021. Not so great this year, but is pitching better. Now, with Jorge Soler, the only thing I worry about is he is going to have to play in the outfield. He has had a track record of injuries. He's more of a DH at this point, not a great defender, so I'm curious to see how that goes. Now, for the Braves, I'm going to give them a B. I do like the addition of Jorge Soler and the bat. I just worry about the defense, and they also had to take on the rest of his contract. But in the end, I'll give them a B. Moving on to the Baltimore Orioles, and they had a very busy deadline. No, they didn't have a big player like Tarek Skubal or Garrett Crochet with all the prospects they have, but they addressed a lot of needs, with the biggest need being the rotation. They added Zach Eflin and Trevor Rogers. Both are having pretty solid seasons overall. But what I also like about this is they got these guys for 2025. So if Corbin Burns ends up leaving in free agency, they got some insurance for next year's rotation. They also beefed up the bullpen with Sir Anthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto, and they added some bats with Eloy Jimenez, Christian Pache, and Austin Slater. Eloy Jimenez could be a good platoon with Ryan O'Hearn if he stays healthy. He hits lefties really well, and Christian Pache and Austin Slater, they're good defenders in the outfield, and they also hit lefties well, which could help the Orioles considering the fact that they're 15th overall in WRC plus against lefties with their outfield. Overall, for the Orioles, no, they didn't have a big star like a Skubal or a Crochet, but they addressed a lot of needs. I'll give them an A. Moving on to my Red Sox, and no big flashy trades, but a couple of moves to address some needs, including the bullpen, where they've had a lot of injuries as of late. They got Luis Garcia from the Angels, who's having a solid year, and Lucas Sims from the Reds, who has over 10 strikeouts per nine in his career. And for both these guys, they only give up prospects that are getting close to Rule 5 eligibility and guys that are really far away in the minor leagues. They also got Danny Jansen to give them a bit of an upgrade at the catcher position, and it's also a right-handed bat instead of a left-handed bat, which they have a ton of in their lineup already. And they got Quinn Priester. There's a lot of upside here. Former top 100 prospect with the Pirates, just hasn't fully figured it out with the Pirates. Let's see if they could tap into some of that potential. In the end, I think the Red Sox did pretty well. I'm going to give them a B. For the Chicago Cubs, they basically had a retool kind of a deadline. The big move they made was bringing in Isaac Paredes for Christopher Morel and a couple of prospects. Paredes, in my opinion, has a higher floor, which I think will serve the Cubs better over the next couple of years, while Morel could have a bit of a higher ceiling, and the Rays can try and tap into that potential. The Cubs also added a couple of arms. Former top 100 prospect Nate Pearson. There's a lot of upside there. He can end up being a really good reliever if the Cubs can tap into that potential. And Jack Neely, they got him in the Mark Leiter Jr. trade. Now, Jack Neely, he's got good stuff, posting good numbers down in the minors this year. This could be a really good get for the Cubs. They also got Benjamin Callis in that trade. Pretty solid middle infielder, putting up some good numbers in the minor leagues. Now, for the Cubs, I would have liked to have seen them maybe make another move, maybe like a Jamison Tyone, possibly Ian Happ, something to maybe clear some payroll, bring in some prospects, and then they can retool more in the offseason. In the end, though, I think the Cubs had a decent deadline. Bringing in Isaac Paredes, I think, was a good move, and they got some upside there. I'll give them a B. On to the Chicago White Sox, and they were supposed to be the story of this deadline, but instead they hung on to both Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert. Garrett Crochet was looking for a contract extension if you wanted him to pitch in the postseason, and Luis Robert, he's been up and down with the health and the numbers this year. I expect both of them to get moved in the offseason. As for the players they brought in, you got Miguel Vargas, former top 100 prospect. There's a floor there. I think he could be a pretty solid player, has a good hit tool. And then you got William Bergola as well. Again, another guy with a good hit tool. I think a bit of a floor. You got Alexander Albertus here. Again, high floor, high hit tool. They did get a guy who could have some power projection in Gerald Perez. Has a 50 raw power future grade, so let's see if that turns into anything. You got a few pitchers here. You got Gerald Rosado, has some pretty good stuff, but more of a reliever. You got Trey Mago, again, has some good stuff, but more of a reliever. In the end, not really a whole lot to be excited about with this prospect haul. Again, Garrett Crochet, Luis Robert, definitely could have brought in some good pieces there. But with these guys, it's just a wait and see, really. I'm honestly a little disappointed they didn't move guys, like Andrew Vaughn and John Brebbia. I feel Andrew Vaughn hits lefties pretty well. Brebbia could have been a pretty solid bullpen piece. The metrics outpace the surface numbers. So little disappointed they hung on to both those guys. I don't know. I'm just not really feeling very excited about this deadline for the White Sox. Maybe it's just the fact they hung on to Crochet and Robert. They didn't get the best deal they were looking for. It's kind of a wait and see for me, but I don't know. To me, kind of underwhelming for the White Sox this deadline. For the Cincinnati Reds, they had a slight retool this year. They traded away Frankie Montas to the Brewers, and in return, they got Joey Weimer. There's a lot of power upside there. He's got speed. He's good in the field. Now, he hasn't fully figured it out in the major leagues yet, so let's see if the Reds can tap into some of that potential in the Lucas Sims trade. With the Red Sox, they got Ovis Portas. Now, a guy who has good velocity, has a pretty good slider to go along with it, but he's basically a two-pitch pitcher at this point. Doesn't throw a whole lot of strikes, so there's a lot of reliever risk there. Let's see what happens with that. I just feel like the Reds could have done a bit more. Jonathan India, he was in the rumor mill. I feel like he could have brought back something good. Nick Martinez, I definitely think, could have brought something back. Now, Emilio Pagan, someone like him could have brought something in return. I don't know. I just feel like the Reds could have done a bit more here. I'm going to go with a C. For the Cleveland Guardians, they made a couple of decent moves. They brought in Alex Cobb to help beef up the rotation. They did need to add some starting pitching. Now, with Cobb, he has been hurt this year, but when he's healthy, he is a solid pitcher for the most part. They brought in Lane Thomas. He matches lefty, so that's going to be a bit of an upgrade for them. Now, with Lane Thomas, though, they did have to give up Alex Clemmy, their second-round pick from last year's draft. There's a lot of upside with him. Good velocity from the left side. Has some good stuff. So that was pretty painful to have to give him up, in my opinion. I just feel like the Guardians could have done a little bit more. I like that they addressed a need with the rotation, and they brought in another bat. So I do like those moves. I just feel like you could have done a little bit more. I'll go C+ for the Guardians. For the Colorado Rockies, they traded away a couple of relievers in Jalen Beeks and Nick Mears. They got back a few prospects. You got Bradley Blaylock back from the Brewers, a higher floor pitching prospect, in my opinion. Not a bad one to add to your organization. You got a couple of higher upside guys, and Eugenier Herrera, who is a starter, throws a lot of strikes, has a good slider. There is a little bit of upside there. And you got Luis Peralta, more of a relief pitching prospect, has a good fastball and a slider. Let's see if he turns in anything. I just feel like the Rockies could have done a bit more here. Cal Quantrill, he was on the rumor mill a lot. He ended up staying put. Even someone like Brendan Rodgers, I feel like could have maybe been useful to another team out there. I just feel like the Rockies, I don't know, I just didn't really do all that much to me. I'm going to go with a D. For the Detroit Tigers, their biggest trade piece was Tarek Skubal, but in the end, he stayed put, and instead they traded away Jack Flaherty, Andrew Chafin, and Mark Canha. In the Jack Flaherty deal with the Dodgers, they got Tehran Lorenzo, one of the Dodgers' higher prospects, has a lot of power upside. Not a great hit tool, though. Not putting up amazing numbers in the minors this year, but let's see if the Tigers can tap into some of that. They also got Trey Sweeney in this deal. This is the third time he's been moved now, but I think he's a high floor bat. I think he can end up being a pretty decent player down the road. They got a few pitchers at this deadline as well. Joseph Montalvo, starting pitching prospect, a guy that has a good slider, decent velocity, has an okay changeup as well, throws a lot of strikes. He could end up being something. They got Chase Lee, has a good slider, and Eric Silva has a good curveball. Those two are relief pitching prospects. In the end, you could argue, could the Tigers have moved Tarek Skubal and gotten back some really good pieces in return? Sure, but I think for Tarek Skubal in the end, they hang on to him. They're going to have him for next year. So that's a win in my books for the Tigers. In the end, I'll go with a B. Moving on to the Houston Astros, and their biggest addition was Yusei Kikuchi. Now, don't get me wrong, they needed to add some starting pitching, and Kikuchi's going to give them some good depth down the stretch, but my goodness, they gave up a lot for half a season of Kikuchi, and they have one of the lowest ranked farm systems in the game. They gave up Jake Bloss, who's a top 100 prospect on Fangraphs, a good pitching prospect, good velocity, good stuff, putting up good numbers in the minor leagues this year. They also gave up Joey Loperfido, a guy with some power upside, some speed, could be a decent outfielder down the road. And they also gave up Will Wagner, a pretty decent bat, putting up some good numbers in the minor leagues. This is a big package for Yusei Kikuchi. They also got Caleb Ferguson from the Yankees. He's pretty good on lefties, but not an inspiring reliever to add. I just feel like the Astros, they gave up a lot here. In the end, I'm going to give them a D. I just don't agree with giving up that much for a rental in Kikuchi, who I don't think is much of a game changer. On to the Kansas City Royals. They had themselves a good offseason, and now they've had themselves a good deadline too. They added Lucas Erceg from the A's. I absolutely love this move. He's been great out of the bullpen. Great stuff, and he's under control for 5 more seasons. What a get for the Royals, and this was on top of Hunter Harvey not too long ago, who's also been pitching well out of the bullpen, and he's under control for next season too. They added Paul DeJong, gives them another bat who's shown some power this year. Michael Lorenzen, some depth for the rotation. I think the Royals had themselves a really solid deadline. Nothing flashy by any means, but just some good, solid moves. I'll go B+. On to the LA Angels, and I think they did okay here. They traded away relievers Carlos Estevez and Luis Garcia, and they got back a bunch of prospects. In the Estevez deal, they got back a couple of pretty good pitching prospects from the Phillies. They got George Clausen and Samuel Aldegari. Clausen has good stuff, good velocity, curveball, and a cutter. Aldegari, not as much velocity, but has a good curveball and a slider, has more of a floor, in my opinion. And in the Luis Garcia trade, they got back a few prospects from the Red Sox that were coming up on Rule 5 eligibility. Matthew Lugo could end up being a pretty decent middle infielder down the road. Really broke out with the bat this year down in the minors. They got Ryan Zeperhan, has some good stuff, but he walks a lot of guys. And Nico Gavadas, a guy that strikes out a lot, but is a big power threat and walks a good amount too. So, in the end, I think the Angels could have done a little bit more. In my opinion, they should have traded away Luis Rengifo and Taylor Ward. I thought he was going to get moved and ended up staying put. I think in the end for the Angels, they added some prospects. That's what they needed to do. So I'll give them a B. On to the LA Dodgers, and I think they did a great job here. They added a bunch of different players to fill different needs, starting with the rotation. They added Jack Flaherty. He's been having a great year, one of the best years of his career. So he's only going to help out in a rotation that's had a bunch of injuries this year. Good add there. They also added Tommy Edman. I love this addition. They've also had injuries on the position player side of things. Now, Edman, I know he hasn't played yet this year. He is on a rehab assignment as of right now, but this is a guy that has a bunch of versatility. He's a solid player, in my opinion. He's really going to help out with that versatility there, considering all the injuries that they have had. Now, Michael Kopech, another addition from the Chicago White Sox, has had his ups and downs this year, but has been pitching well as of late. And this is a guy with really good stuff, and the Dodgers have shown they can get more out of pitchers. I'm excited to see what they can do with Kopech here. They also added a couple other guys for depth. They got Kevin Kiermaier. They got Ahmed Rosario, who should also help out there with Max Muncy, with who knows when he's coming back. And Rosario has been doing well with the bat this year. Overall, I think the Dodgers had a great trade deadline. They didn't get a big star by any means. They didn't make a checkmate kind of a move, but I thought it was really solid. They addressed a lot of needs. I'm going to go with an A for the Dodgers. On to the Miami Marlins, and even though they were sellers, I think Peter Bendix did absolutely incredible here. They traded away Jazz Chisholm, Tanner Scott, Trevor Rogers, AJ Puck, and Brian De La Cruz, and they got an absolute haul of prospects, both high ceiling and high floor. I mean, where do we start here? You got Agustin Ramirez in the Jazz Chisholm deal, a very good looking bat. Still needs to figure it out behind the plate a little bit, but he has a really good arm. I think Agustin Ramirez could be their future catcher down the road. Connor Norby, they got back in the Trevor Rogers deal. I'm a big fan of Connor Norby. Could be a everyday second baseman in the near future, a very good hitter, putting up good numbers in the minor leagues this year. They got a high power bat in Davison De Los Santos in the AJ Puck deal. As you can see here, has a 70 raw power, also putting up great numbers in the minor leagues this year. They got Graham Pauley back in the Tanner Scott deal, a pretty balanced player overall, could be solid for them. You got Kyle Stowers back from the Orioles, a pretty, I would say, a high upside power guy, could be a good outfielder down the road. You got Jared Cerna back in the Jazz Chisholm deal as well. I would say for him, you're looking at a possible really balanced player down the road. I'm excited to see what he can do. You got Andrew Pinter, a guy that shows good plate discipline as well as some good power as well and has some speed. They also got Robbie Snelling. This guy had an amazing season in the minor leagues last year. He came into the year as a top 100 prospect on MLB Pipeline, not putting up great numbers, but we've seen the Marlins turn guys around in their system. I'm very excited to see what they can do with Robbie Snelling. I think there is some upside there. They also got Jun Suk Sim from the Pirates in the Brian De La Cruz deal. International signing from Korea not too long ago. Has a lot of velocity, 6'4", big frame, a lot of projection there. There is a lot to like with what the Marlins did here. I think they did amazing. For me, I'm going A+. Even though they were sellers, they needed to add prospects. They did what they had to do. They did amazing. On to the Milwaukee Brewers, and I think they did okay. They needed to add some starting pitching as they ranked near the bottom of Major League Baseball this year. They added Frankie Montas as well as Aaron Savali a little while ago. Montas has not been pitching well as of late. Maybe they can get him back on track. Savali, he's more just a guy that gives them innings at this point. He's been kind of whatever. Nick Mears, I thought was a decent addition for their bullpen. That FIP is a lot better than the ERA, so I think that's going to be a nice add. Now, Christian Yelich, he's also hurt right now, and I thought they were going to add a bat. In the end, they ended up not doing that. Looks like they're going to stick in-house. But for me, I think the Brewers, since they did add a couple of guys to fill a need, I'll give them credit for that. I'll go C+. On to the Minnesota Twins, and they made one addition by adding Trevor Richards for the bullpen. I think they needed to add something for that rotation, and even if they did add something for the bullpen, I think it had to be better than Trevor Richards. The Twins are a good team this year, so I was expecting a bit more out of them at the deadline. I think this was a bad deadline for them. I'm going with an F. On to the New York Mets, and I think they had a low-key decent deadline. They added Jesse Winker, who's having a renaissance of a year, has a 375 on base, a 126 WRC+. Their offense has already been pretty good this year, so adding Jesse Winker to it is only going to help. They needed to add some starting pitching. I wish they would have added a little bit more here, especially with Kadai Senga out for the rest of the year. They added Paul Blackburn. He's a guy that's going to give you innings if he's healthy. We'll see how that goes. They added to the bullpen, though, Huascar Brazoban. I think that was a decent add. He's pitching pretty well this year. I would have liked to have seen some more starting pitching for the Mets, though, so I think that kind of holds me back. But I did like the Winker addition. I like the bullpen addition of Brazoban, so I'll go C+ for the Mets. At least they went out there and made moves, especially when it was looking like for a while that they were going to sell. On to the New York Yankees, and I think they did really well here. They added Jazz Chisholm, a lightning rod kind of a move, but I think a move that's going to end up being really good for them. They needed some speed in the lineup. They ranked dead last in base running. He's only going to help out in that department, but he's also going to bring some power from the left side. Bat fits perfectly at Yankee Stadium, gives them some versatility. He's even playing some third base. He can play second outfield if needed. Jazz, I think, was a great add for them. Mark Leiter Jr., I think, is going to be a really nice addition for the bullpen. They've had a couple issues there at the back end of the bullpen. Mark Leiter, I think, is going to be a nice pickup there. As you can see, a FIP of 2.22, very solid. They got Año de los Santos as well, gives them some depth in their bullpen. Now, I did add another tier. I'm going to go A- for the Yankees. I don't think it was as good as the Dodgers or the Orioles, but I think they did really well here. Adding Jazz, I think, it was, in a way, kind of an underrated move. I think it's going to end up paying off for them. Moving on to the Oakland A's, and they ended up hanging on to both Brent Rooker and Mason Miller. If they had traded those guys, they would have gotten back some serious prospects in return, so I feel like they missed out on an opportunity there, but they did trade away Lucas Erceg and Paul Blackburn. They got back a few prospects. You got Mason Barnett, who can end up being a pretty decent pitcher down the road, has a good fastball, slider, curveball, changeup to go along with it. You got Will Klein, a relief pitching prospect with good stuff. Definitely could be a good piece in the bullpen down the road. You got Cade Morris, a guy that I think has more of a floor, has a 4-pitch mix, and you got Jared Dickey, an outfielder in high A right now, having a decent year. You know, I think for Oakland in the end, like I said, I feel like they missed out on an opportunity. They got some prospects back. I think they could have done more, though. I'll go with a C. On to the Philadelphia Phillies. No major splashes, but they made some solid moves. They got Carlos Estevez from the Angels. He's having a great year in the bullpen. That's going to help shore things up back there. They also got Tanner Banks from the White Sox, who's having a pretty solid year, and he's not a free agent until after 2028. They got Austin Hayes. That's a good platoon bat to go with Brandon Marsh in the outfield. He hits lefties really well. They even got Seth Johnson, a pitching prospect, to add to their system. I think they did really well here. Again, no big splashes by any means, but they did great. I'm going to give them a B+. On to the Pittsburgh Pirates, and they really needed to add a bat here, and they got a couple with Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Brian De La Cruz. IKF is having the best year of his career so far with a 116 WRC+. Does give them some versatility, and he's under contract for next year, so I thought that was an okay add. Brian De La Cruz has been okay this year. They also added an okay lefty in Jalen Beeks from the Rockies, and they also got Nick York in the Quinn Priester trade. Nick York was running out of time in Boston. He was coming up on Rule 5 eligibility, so he's going to have a chance here to be a solid player for the Pirates. In the end, I think for the Pirates, they could have done more when it came to adding a bat, but they did add a couple at least, so I'll give them a C+. On to the San Diego Padres, and this is a bit of a mixed bag. They made some great additions here with Tanner Scott, Brian Hoeing, Jason Adam, and Martin Perez for depth, but they gave up a lot here. They gave up Dylan Lesko, Robbie Snelling, their top 2 pitching prospects, Graham Pauley, who was a pretty high prospect for them, gave up Homer Bush, who had a lot of upside. I mean, this is a lot to give up just for, one reliever that's under control for the rest of this year. Brian Hoeing, Jason Adam, they have a little bit of control on them, but, Martin Perez, this was the best starting pitcher that you could have added here, and he's a free agent after this year. So, I don't know. I'm a little weird on this Padres deadline. Again, I like that they added to the back end of the bullpen. That's only going to help them, but my goodness, they basically just sold the farm for 3 relievers and a pretty mediocre starting pitcher. So, I appreciate the aggressiveness in a way, but I don't know. Giving up all that, that's a lot. I'll go B for the Padres. I could even consider a C+, but I'll go in the middle. I'll go a B. On to the San Francisco Giants, and they had an odd trade deadline. They dumped some salary by trading away Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson to the Braves, Alex Cobb to the Guardians, but why didn't you trade away Blake Snell? He's making a lot of money. According to reports, a lot of teams are interested in him. Why is he still with the Giants? He's a good second half pitcher. He definitely could have helped the team down the stretch, so I don't know what's going on there. And then they traded for Mark Canha. I just didn't understand this at all. I did not like this deadline for the Giants. I don't know, really confusing to me. I'm giving them an F. On to the Seattle Mariners, and they really had to add some bats, and they did just that, trading for Randy Arozarena and Justin Turner. I think these two bats are great for the Mariners because Randy Arozarena, who has turned his season around, he's been a lot better over the last month. This is a guy that gets on base, and the Mariners rank near the bottom when it comes to on-base percentage. And Justin Turner, he's a guy that makes a lot of contact, doesn't strike out a whole lot, and he gets on base. Again, something the Mariners really needed. I would have liked for the Mariners to add one more bat here, preferably something for first base. I think Yandy Diaz would have been a good add, but in the end, they did good adding two. They also shored up the bullpen with Yimi Garcia having a good year, and JT Shagwa, he'll add something for middle relief there. In the end, I think the Mariners did a good job. Again, I think one more bat would have been nice. I'll go an A- for the Mariners. On to the St. Louis Cardinals, and their biggest addition was adding Eric Fetty from the White Sox. He came back over from the KBO last year, and he's been pitching really well this year. That's going to help shore up the rotation down the stretch and give them another arm for the postseason if they make it there. You brought back an old friend in Tommy Pham, hit a grand slam in his first came back, but that gives them another solid bat to go to. You also added Sean Armstrong for the bullpen. His FIP is much better than the ERA, so I thought that was pretty solid. In the end, I think the Cardinals did a pretty decent job. I'm going to go with a B+. On to the Rays, and just like the Marlins, they got back a ton of prospects at this deadline, starting with the Randy Arozarena trade. They got Aiden Smith, very speedy, has some power upside. This is a guy that could definitely be an impact player down the road. They got Brody Hopkins as well, a very high upside pitcher, big fastball, slider, changeup, cutter to go along with it. There's a lot to like there. And speaking of pitching prospects, in the Jason Adam deal, they got Dylan Lesko back, a top 100 prospect. Sure, having a down year in the minor leagues, but my goodness, this guy has stuff off the charts. Put him with the Rays, and let's see how far they can get him to go. My goodness, what a great addition that was. Homer Bush, very athletic, has an 80 speed tool. Still needs to kind of work it out with the bat a little bit, but there is a lot of upside there. You did get a power upside bat in Mac Horvath there. You got Jackson Baumeister. Both those guys came back in the Zach Eflin deal. Definitely a lot to like here with Baumeister. I think more of a floor when it comes to being a pitching prospect, but he has a good fastball and a curveball, has a slider there as well. They did get Matthew Etzel. And earlier I mentioned Isaac Paredes going to the Cubs, and back to the Rays, they got Christopher Morel. He's not putting up amazing numbers this year, but he does have 19 home runs. He had 26 home runs last year, and a lot of the advanced metrics are outpacing the surface numbers. I think the Rays, they did a great job here. I think the Marlins beat them out a little bit when it came to the prospects, so I'll go an A for the Rays, but they did great. On to the Texas Rangers, and they decided not to sell. They are 4.5 back in the division. They are going to be getting some guys back off the IL soon, including Jacob deGrom, Evan Carter, Josh Young possibly. So they're going to go for it in the second half. So really all they did was add Andrew Chafin, and I love Andrew Chafin. This is a good add for the bullpen here. That's going to help shore things up. They also got back Walter Pennington in exchange for Michael Lorenzen. There's a bit to like with Walter Pennington. He could end up being a good reliever down the road. There's a lot of upside there for him being a bullpen arm. In the end, the Rangers didn't do all that much, either buying or selling. I'll give them a C. On to the Blue Jays, and no, they didn't trade Vlad Jr. or Bo Bichette, but I think they did really well at this deadline. Earlier, I talked about Jake Bloss, Joey Loperfido, and Will Wagner. I thought that was a great package for them to get back for Yusei Kikuchi. That is a steal of a package. They also got back in the deal with the Pirates. They got Charles McAdoo. He's hitting for a lot of power down in the minor leagues this year between high A and double A. Had a 561 slugging at high A this year, so look out for him. He could end up being a pretty solid bat down the road. They also got Jonathan Clase in the Yimi Garcia deal, a guy with a ton of speed, has a little bit of upside for the power. He's hitting pretty well down in the minor leagues this year. I think Jonathan Clase could end up being an exciting player. Cutter Coffee, they got back in the Danny Jansen deal with the Red Sox. There's a little bit of pop there. He has a little bit of speed. Look out for him. He could end up being, something down the road. In the end, I think the Blue Jays did really well. They added some solid prospects here. I'm going to give them an A. And last but not least, we got the Washington Nationals. Earlier, we talked about Lane Thomas going to the Guardians, and back to the Nationals, you had Alex Clemmie, a second-round pitching prospect from last year. He's 6'6". There's a lot of projection here. Has a big fastball and a curveball. Still needs to work out some things, but there's a lot of upside here with Alex Clemmie. Also in this deal, you got Jose Tena, a guy that has some power upside, along with Rafael Ramirez Jr., has a 60 raw power tool. And then you got Tyler Stewart, who came back in the Jesse Winker deal. Has some things to work with, has a decent fastball and a slider. The numbers don't look amazing so far with him this year. In the Dylan Floro deal, they got Andres Chaparro. This is a guy who's having a good year down in the minor leagues. He's hitting .332 with a .564 slugging, 19 home runs in AAA. Look out, maybe he can end up being something. In the end, I think the Nationals, they got back some decent prospects. I'm going to go with a B. But those are my grades for this year's trade deadline. Let me know what you think down below. What are your grades for your favorite team? What do you think about these grades? Let me know. But everyone, that's all I got for right now. If you count on the way out, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and I'll talk to you next time.